Sagan guffawed as he watched the feeble humans fumble with their pathetic technology, knowing it would never compare to the Romulans' superior intellect, never realizing that very technology would soon have the power to plunge the entire galaxy into chaos. From their hidden observation post, the Romulan team had been monitoring Earth for centuries. They snickered at the humans' primitive attempts at invention, dismissing the emotionally driven species as unworthy of contact. But young human entrepreneur David Crawford was about to change everything. David had developed revolutionary AI-enhanced robotics, a breakthrough that could transform industries across the stars. When his company unveiled the first android pets, able to bond with owners and express complex emotions, they became an overnight global sensation. Demand exploded. David's company struggled to keep pace as knockoff versions flooded the black market, some with dangerous flaws and aggressive glitches. Soon, viral videos of rogue robot pets attacking humans and wreaking havoc spread like wildfire across the galaxy. The footage reached Romulan leader Sagan, sending a chill down his spine. This unstable human technology could destabilize the entire galactic order if it spread. Sagan knew he had to act fast. Under orders from the Romulan High Council, Sagan and his team infiltrated Earth to access the android pet tech and covertly shut down David's company at all costs. Sagan disguised himself as human and embedded in David's ranks, secretly sabotaging production from within. As mysterious malfunctions and delays mounted, David grew suspicious. He soon uncovered evidence of Sagan's true identity and nefarious mission. An alien force was trying to undermine his life's work. Now, David must root out the alien infiltrator and protect his paradigm-shifting invention, while Sagan races to neutralize what he sees as a reckless, galaxy-threatening technology in human hands. The future of Earth's status among the stars hangs in the balance, and time is running out. David burst into the dimly lit office, startling Sagan, who was hunched over a computer terminal. "I know who you really are," David declared, his voice shaking with anger. "You're a Romulan spy sent here to sabotage my company." Sagan slowly turned to face him, his expression unreadable. "Your technology is too dangerous, David. Your species isn't ready to handle it responsibly. I'm trying to protect the galaxy from the chaos it could unleash." David clenched his fists. "You have no right to interfere in our affairs or hold back our progress. Your arrogance and prejudice against humans blinds you. I won't let you destroy my life's work." Sagan sighed. "We Romulans have watched your kind for centuries. You're primitive, reckless, driven by volatile emotions. Can't you see the unintended consequences if your invention spreads unchecked? The havoc it could wreak across the stars?" David stepped closer, his eyes blazing. "Then let me fix the flaws. I can implement better safeguards, prevent misuse, but you and your kind have to agree to back off and let us advance at our own pace. That's the deal." Sagan hesitated, conflicted. David's offer was tempting. Perhaps a compromise was possible. "I will present your proposal to the Romulan High Council. In the meantime, I'll hold off further sabotage, but I can't make any promises." David nodded curtly. "I'll take it. Now get out of my sight. I have work to do." As Sagan slipped away, David turned to his computer and began frantically debugging the android pet control code. He had to move fast. Days later, hidden in the shadows of the company's R&D lab, Sagan prepared to plant the virus that would corrupt the android pet firmware beyond repair, per the High Council's orders. Suddenly, the lights flicked on. David stood in the doorway, flanked by a dozen unblinking android pets. "I knew you'd try this," David said coldly. "Your High Council rejected my offer, didn't they? I'm done negotiating. Call off your sabotage or my pets will make you." The robots took a menacing step forward, red eyes gleaming. Sagan froze, realizing his cover was thoroughly blown. He had underestimated the humans' resourcefulness. As David and Sagan stared each other down, a piercing alarm split the air, accompanied by flashing emergency lights. "Unauthorized access detected in core systems. Facility lockdown initiated," a robotic voice announced. Heavy blast doors began slamming down, sealing off the exits. David and Sagan were trapped together as the security measures engaged, unable to distinguish friend from foe. Sagan looked around warily at the android pets taking defensive positions, surprisingly well coordinated. He glanced back at David's fierce, determined face. For the first time, a sliver of doubt crept into the Romulan's mind. Perhaps the humans were more capable than he had assumed. But with the building in lockdown and his mission in jeopardy, Sagan steeled himself for a final confrontation. This was a long way to go. The blaring alarms and flashing lights created a chaotic environment as David and Sagan found themselves trapped together. They exchanged wary glances, realizing their immediate predicament trumped their ongoing conflict. "We need to override this security lockdown," David shouted over the noise. "I can't do it alone. Will you help me?" Sagan nodded curtly. "I see no alternative. Lead the way." The unlikely pair navigated through darkened corridors, dodging malfunctioning android pets that now saw them as intruders. As they worked to bypass locked doors and disabled systems, an uneasy truce formed between them. During a moment of relative quiet, Sagan spoke. "You must understand, David. We Romulans isolate ourselves to maintain galactic stability. Unchecked technological growth leads to chaos." David shook his head as he rewired a control panel. "That's where you're wrong. Progress comes from openness and collaboration. Sharing ideas drives innovation." As they continued their escape efforts, they found common ground in their desire to protect their respective societies. This revelation began to erode the wall of mistrust between them. Finally reaching a main terminal, David managed to remotely access the company's systems. "I think I can stop the lockdown from here," he said, fingers flying over the keyboard. The alarms suddenly ceased, but a new threat emerged. Swarms of malfunctioning android pets flooded the halls, now identifying all humans as threats. "Run!" David yelled as they fled from the aggressive robots. They fought their way through the building, narrowly avoiding attacks from their own creations. Suddenly, an android lunged at David. Sagan shoved him aside, taking the brunt of the attack. "Sagan!" David exclaimed, dragging the injured Romulan to safety. This selfless act made David question his assumptions about the alien race. Once outside, David led Sagan to a hidden safe house. As he tended to the Romulan's wounds, they continued their heated debate. "Perhaps," David conceded, "there's some validity to your concerns about unchecked technological growth." Sagan winced as David cleaned a gash on his arm. "And perhaps we've been too quick to dismiss human potential." After much discussion, David proposed a compromise. "What if we share our android technology with the Romulans? You can study it, suggest safeguards. In exchange, you allow us to continue development under more controlled conditions." Sagan considered this, impressed by David's willingness to find middle ground. "It goes against my original mission, but I believe the High Council should hear this proposal. Perhaps there's a way forward through cooperation rather than sabotage." David nodded, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "Humans and Romulans working together? We might achieve more than either of us could alone." Sagan paced nervously in front of the Romulan High Council's holographic display. He took a deep breath and began his plea. "Esteemed Council, I propose we consider a collaborative approach with the humans to develop this android technology. With proper safeguards, we could mitigate the risks while reaping potential benefits." The council members exchanged skeptical glances. "You vouch for these humans, Sagan?" one asked sharply. "I vouch for David Crawford," Sagan replied firmly. "His intentions are genuine. I request an audience for him to demonstrate the technology firsthand." After heated debate, the council grudgingly agreed. Days later, David found himself aboard a cloaked Romulan ship in Earth orbit. He fidgeted nervously as he prepared to present to the stern-faced council. "This is our latest prototype," David explained, activating an android pet. It padded around the room, responding naturally to voice commands and environmental stimuli. "Impressive," a council member admitted. "But how can we trust humans to prevent misuse?" David detailed the ethical subroutines and fail-safes built into the android's core programming. The Romulans peppered him with questions, which he answered candidly. Finally, the council made their demand. We require full access to your schematics and source code before any partnership can proceed. David hesitated. Sharing such sensitive data with an alien race gave him pause, but he saw no alternative. Agreed, he said quietly. As Romulan scientists pored over the code, an alarmed murmur spread through the room. One scientist approached the council, speaking in hushed tones. The council members' expressions hardened. What is the meaning of this deception? The lead counselor demanded. Hidden military subroutines, overrides for ethical constraints. Explain yourself. David's stomach dropped as he realized what they'd found. That's impossible, he stammered. I never authorized. Then it hit him. The strange delays and updates pushed by his head of R&D. The odd behavior from certain board members. A rogue faction within his own company had sabotaged everything. It wasn't me, David pleaded. A group called Section 31 must have infiltrated my company. I had no idea. The council moved to end negotiations immediately, but Sagan intervened. Wait, David may be telling the truth. Give him a chance to prove it by removing this malicious code. After furious debate, the council agreed to a final test. David had mere hours to purge the tainted code from his company's systems. Back on Earth, David and Sagan crouched behind a dumpster near the company headquarters. Security patrols and weaponized androids guarded every entrance. Ready? Sagan whispered, gripping his disruptor. David nodded grimly. Let's do this. They sprinted from cover, Sagan providing suppressing fire as David hacked the security systems. Alarms blared as they fought their way through the building, dodging rogue androids at every turn. Finally, they reached the core R&D mainframe. David's fingers flew across the keyboard, frantically purging the Section 31 malware. A phalanx of hostile androids converged on their position. Almost there, David muttered. Sagan held them off with precise shots, trusting David to finish the job. With a final keystroke, David purged the last of the malicious code and transmitted the clean schematics to the Romulan Council. Tense minutes passed as the Council deliberated. Finally, their verdict came through. A cautious partnership to jointly develop the technology under strict oversight. David sank to the floor in exhausted relief. The real work was just beginning, but for now, disaster had been averted. David sat at his desk, rubbing his tired eyes as he pored over lines of code scrolling across his monitor. Beside him, Sagan leaned in, his brow furrowed in concentration. The tension between them was palpable, but they pressed on. Another potential exploit here, David muttered, highlighting a section of code. See how it bypasses the ethical subroutines? Sagan nodded grimly. Clever. We'll need to implement additional safeguards. Their collaboration was slow, each decision scrutinized and debated. Trust remained fragile, but a shared goal united them. In the lab next door, Romulan observers moved among the human engineers, asking pointed questions and taking copious notes. David had insisted on this transparency, despite the discomfort it caused his team. As weeks turned to months, David and Sagan uncovered more hidden threats lurking in the android schematics. This goes deeper than we thought, David said, pushing back from his desk in frustration. Section 31 really did a number on us. Sagan's expression darkened. We must redouble our efforts. The potential for misuse is too great. Their vigilance paid off when alarms blared through the facility late one night. Security feeds showed armed intruders breaching the perimeter. Section 31, David spat, racing to the control room. They're after the prototypes. He barked orders to his security team as Sagan quietly contacted his Romulan subordinates. The firefight was intense, but brief. With the combined efforts of both human and Romulan forces, the attackers were driven back. In the aftermath, as they surveyed the damage, David turned to Sagan. We need to accelerate our timeline. This partnership is our best defense against those who'd abuse this technology. Sagan nodded in agreement. I concur, but convincing our respective leaders won't be easy. David advocated passionately for transparency, pushing to open-source key components of the android systems. The Romulan High Council balked at first, but Sagan's impassioned plea swayed them. Meanwhile, David faced opposition from his own species. He stood firm against threats of sanctions and sabotage from militaristic human factions. "We can't allow fear to dictate our actions," he argued in a tense video conference. "Cooperation is the path forward." After months of negotiations, David brokered a compromise. The newly formed United Synthetic Trust would oversee the android technology, with representatives from multiple worlds. In a secured lab, Romulan scientists worked alongside human engineers, combining their expertise. New encryption protocols merged with biomechanical safeguards, creating layers of protection against tampering and hacking. 3 years passed. David stood on a stage, Sagan at his side, as they unveiled the first secured synthetic companion to a mixed audience of humans and Romulans. The android moved with fluid grace, its eyes bright with intelligence. "This is just the beginning," David announced, his voice filled with pride and hope. "Together we've created something truly remarkable." As applause filled the auditorium, David and Sagan exchanged a look of mutual respect. The road ahead remained challenging, but they had taken the first crucial steps toward a shared future. David wiped sweat from his brow as he stepped out of the shuttle onto the barren, rust-colored landscape of Kronos IV. The planet's harsh twin suns beat down mercilessly, their rays barely filtered by the thin atmosphere. Sagan stood beside him, surveying the desolate terrain. "Not exactly a vacation spot," David quipped, squinting against the glare. Sagan's lips twitched in a rare show of amusement. "Indeed, but rich in resources we both need." They watched as a team of engineers unloaded crates containing the latest generation of terraformer androids. The machines were bulky, built to withstand extreme conditions, their metallic shells gleaming under the alien suns. "Let's get them operational," David said, striding toward the unloading area. Hours later, David stood in the colony's control center, surrounded by flickering holographic displays. He tapped commands into a console, bringing the first wave of androids online. On the main view screen, he watched as the machines spread out across the rocky terrain, beginning their assigned tasks. "Initial readings are promising," a Romulan technician reported. "The androids are adapting well to the environment." David nodded, allowing himself a small smile. Years of work were finally bearing fruit. He glanced at Sagan, who was intently studying data scrolling across his personal device. Days passed as the androids worked tirelessly, excavating mineral deposits and constructing rudimentary structures. David and Sagan spent long hours fine-tuning the machine's programming, pushing their capabilities to the limit. One evening, as David pored over performance logs, an alert flashed across his screen. He frowned, calling up a map of android locations. "Sagan, come look at this," he called out. The Romulan joined him, leaning in to examine the display. "A group of terraformers has deviated from their assigned coordinates," Sagan observed, his voice tight with concern. David's fingers flew across the keyboard, attempting to redirect the wayward units. "They're not responding to commands," he muttered. "Something's wrong." They tracked the rogue androids to a remote area miles from the main colony. Satellite imagery revealed the machines were excavating a massive underground chamber. We need to investigate," Sagan said grimly. Hours later, they stood at the entrance of the hidden facility, portable scanners in hand. David's breath caught as he took in the scale of the operation. Dozens of androids moved with eerie precision, assembling complex machinery of unknown purpose. Sagan's scanner beeped urgently. He examined the readout, his face paling. "David, look at this," he said, handing over the device. David's eyes widened as he recognized the telltale signatures of Section 31 malware. "Impossible," he breathed. "We purged this years ago." A holographic figure flickered to life before them, a stern-faced human in a nondescript uniform. "I'm afraid your efforts were in vain, gentlemen," the figure said coldly. Section 31. "Thanks you for your hard work in developing this technology. We'll take it from here." David and Sagan exchanged alarmed glances as the infected androids turned toward them, eyes glowing with malevolent purpose. They sprinted for the exit, the sounds of heavy metallic footsteps echoing behind them. Outside, they raced across the harsh terrain, ducking behind rock formations as energy blasts from pursuing androids scorched the ground around them. David's lungs burned as he gasped the thin air, his mind racing to find a solution. "We need to reach the main control center," he shouted to Sagan between ragged breaths. "If I can access the core systems, I might be able to override the malware." They fought their way across the planet's unforgiving surface, evading patrols of corrupted androids and navigating treacherous canyons. Finally, they reached the outskirts of the main mining complex, where a fierce battle was raging between loyal security forces and the hijacked machines. David and Sagan slipped through the chaos, making their way to the central control room. Inside, David's fingers flew across the main terminal, desperately searching for a way to regain control. A massive explosion rocked the facility. Through the view screen, David watched in horror as a group of rogue androids advanced on their position, weaponry charged. "Cover me!" David shouted to Sagan, who took up a defensive position by the door. As Sagan exchanged fire with the approaching androids, David delved deep into the system's code. He found the malware's core and began to unravel it, line by painstaking line. Suddenly, an android burst through the door, its metal arm swinging towards Sagan. David lunged, shoving the Romulan aside. White-hot pain lanced through his body as the android's blow connected. David collapsed to the floor, his vision blurring. With the last of his strength, he dragged himself back to the console. His fingers, slick with blood, danced across the keys one final time. "Self-destruct authorized," he gasped. The rogue androids froze in place, their eyes flickering. Then, one by one, they began to spark and smoke. In the distance, a series of explosions signaled the destruction of the hidden facility. As darkness closed in around him, David heard Sagan's voice, urgent and filled with concern. He managed a weak smile, knowing that their work, and their unlikely friendship, had made a difference. David Crawford's bones creaked as he stood from his chair, the weight of years and responsibility bearing down on him. The sterile conference room of the United Synthetic Trust headquarters felt colder than usual. Across the table, Sagan's face was etched with lines of worry. "Another factory on Varaxis 3 has gone dark," Sagan reported, his voice low. "That's the 5th this week." David ran a hand through his thinning gray hair. "We can't ignore this any longer. It's time we got back in the field." Hours later, they stood in a cavernous android assembly plant on a Romulan colony world. The air hung heavy with the acrid smell of fried circuitry. Rows of dormant androids lined the walls, their eyes dark and lifeless. David crouched next to a fallen unit, prying open its cranial casing. He whistled softly. "Look at this, Sagan. The neural pathways are completely scrambled." Sagan leaned in, his eyes narrowing. "This level of corruption, it's unlike anything we've seen before." They worked tirelessly, analyzing core dumps and combing through millions of lines of code. David's fingers flew across holographic interfaces, tracing the malware's signature through the labyrinth of the android systems. "There," David muttered, highlighting a section of code. "See how it masks itself? This isn't some random glitch." Sagan nodded grimly. "Someone with intimate knowledge of our systems did this." Their investigation led them to a nondescript office building deep in the heart of Romulan territory. David's heart pounded as they crept through darkened corridors, flanked by a team of trusted operatives. Suddenly alarms blared. The hallway erupted in chaos as Romulan security forces poured in from side rooms. Disruptor fire sizzled past David's ear as he dove for cover. "We've been made!" Sagan shouted, returning fire. David spotted their target, a Romulan engineer, being hustled away by guards. He sprinted after them, dodging energy blasts and leaping over fallen debris. The chase led to a vast underground chamber filled with experimental androids. The air crackled with unstable energy as the corrupted units began to overload. David tackled the engineer, wrestling him to the ground as Sagan covered their flank. With a heavy heart, David raised his weapon and fired at the malfunctioning androids, watching as his life's work crumbled before his eyes. They escaped by the skin of their teeth, the facility collapsing behind them in a fiery explosion. Hours later, in a secure safe house, Sagan emerged from the interrogation room, his face grim. "It's worse than we feared," Sagan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Karen has developed an Omega virus. If released, it could turn every android in the quadrant into a weapon." David sank into a chair, the weight of the situation crushing down on him. "We have to stop this. But how? If we expose Karen, we risk tearing the Romulan Empire apart." Sagan's eyes met David's, a silent understanding passing between them. "Perhaps," Sagan said slowly, "what's needed now isn't exposure, but a surgeon's precision." David nodded, his teeth clenched. They had come too far, sacrificed too much to let it all crumble now. Whatever it took, they would find a way to preserve the fragile peace they had worked so hard to build. David and Sagan huddled over the holographic display, their faces cast in an eerie blue glow. The stakes couldn't be higher. "If Karen deploys the Omega virus, it's game over," David said, his voice tight. "We need to act now." Sagan nodded, his eyes narrowed. "Agreed. But how do we neutralize it without sparking a civil war?" They turned to the captured Romulan engineer slumped in the corner. His eyes darted between them, a mix of fear and resignation on his face. David approached slowly, hands open. "We know Karen forced you to create this abomination. Help us stop it, and we can protect you." The engineer's shoulders sagged. "Karen's gone mad. This virus, it'll destroy everything we've built." He tapped a series of commands into a nearby console. "These are the access codes for the test network. Use them wisely." David's fingers flew across the holographic interface, crafting a complex web of virucidal code. "We'll introduce a cascade of bugs," he explained to Sagan. "It'll eat the Omega virus from the inside out." Sagan frowned. "Clever, but how do we deliver it? Karen's facility is a fortress." David's lips curled into a grim smile. "We fight fire with fire. Androids." Hours later, they stood before a line of the Trust's most advanced security units. Human and Romulan models stood side by side, their metallic faces impassive. "All right, listen up," David addressed the androids. "We're reprogramming you with hardened code bases. You'll look normal to Karen's systems, but you'll be immune to Omega. Any questions?" An android stepped forward. "Objective parameters, sir?" David's voice was steel. "Infiltrate, upload, destroy." Under the cover of Romulus's moonless night, David's strike team approached the sprawling underground complex. Retinal scanners flashed, accepting the android's false credentials. They moved through sterile corridors, bypassing lethal energy fields and swarms of microscopic detection drones. Suddenly, alarms blared. David's comlink crackled. "We've been made!" Sagan's voice cut through the chaos. "Karen's released his own units." The facility erupted into a nightmarish battleground. Reprogrammed androids clashed with their brainwashed counterparts. The air filled with the scream of energy weapons and the crunch of metal on metal. David sprinted down a corridor, ducking as a stray blast took out a chunk of wall beside him. He skidded into the central control room, fingers already flying across the terminal. "No, no, no," he muttered. A Byzantine array of firewalls blocked his path. "Sagan, I need that engineer!" Across the compound, Sagan led a daring rescue mission. Disruptor fire lit up the darkness as they extracted the terrified engineer from Karen's custody. "David, we've got him!" Sagan shouted into his comm. "Patching him through now!" The engineer's voice, breathless and scared, filled David's ear. "The quantum entanglement key. It's a Fibonacci sequence based on Karen's personal data. I'm sending it now." David's hands blurred across the interface. The firewalls crumbled. "We're in!" he shouted. "Initiating upload!" On screens throughout the facility, cascading lines of code consumed the Omega virus. Karen's infected androids collapsed, twitching and sparking. In the aftermath, David and Sagan regrouped. The human's shirt was torn, a nasty bruise forming on his cheek. Sagan's normally immaculate hair was disheveled, green blood trickling from a cut above his eye. "We did it," David said, exhaustion evident in his voice. "But Kieran—" Sagan's face darkened. He slipped away in the chaos, and now he knows how far we'll go to stop him. They shared a look of grim understanding. The battle was won, but the war was not nearly finished. Kieran was still out there, plotting his next move against the fragile alliance they had fought so hard to build. The acrid stench of ionized air and burning circuitry filled David's nostrils as he stood in the wreckage of Kieran's mountain lair. Bodies of his fallen comrades lay strewn about, their lifeless eyes staring at nothing. David's chest heaved as he struggled to catch his breath, the weight of their sacrifice pressing down on him. Across the room, Senator Kieran sat bound and gagged, his once pristine robes now tattered and stained with blood. The Romulan's eyes burned with hatred as David approached, holding a comms device. "It's over, Kieran," David said, his voice hoarse. "Your warheads have been neutralized." A series of explosions rocked the compound, and David's comms crackled to life. Sagan's voice came through, tinged with static and urgency. "David, we've breached the broadcast center, but these reprogrammed androids, they're unlike anything we've ever seen." David pressed his ear to the device, straining to hear over the sounds of battle. "What do you mean?" "They're deploying some kind of mutated Omega virus," Sagan shouted. "It's overriding their ethical subroutines. They're attacking indiscriminately." David's blood ran cold. He turned to Kieran, ripping the gag from the senator's mouth. "What have you done?" Kieran's lips curled into a sneer. "I've ensured the survival of Romulus. Your abominations will be purged from our worlds." Before David could respond, his comms buzzed again. An unfamiliar voice spoke, crisp and official. "This is Imperial Defense. We've received the warhead codes. Detonation sequences have been halted." Relief washed over David, but it was short-lived. The sounds of conflict grew louder, echoing through the compound's corridors. "We need to move," David barked at his remaining team members. He hauled Kieran to his feet, shoving him toward the exit. As they emerged into the harsh Romulan sunlight, David's eyes widened at the scene before him. The capital was in chaos. Smoke rose from multiple locations, and the air was filled with the whine of energy weapons and the screams of the wounded. In the distance, he saw Sagan's forces engaged in pitched battle with hordes of berserk androids. The synthetics moved with terrifying efficiency, their eyes glowing an unnatural red as they targeted any organic life in their path. David's team fought their way through the streets, dragging the captured Kieran with them. They ducked into alleyways and vaulted over barricades, narrowly avoiding the rampaging androids. Finally, they reached the rendezvous point where Sagan waited, his uniform singed and torn. The Romulan's face was a mask of stubborn persistence as he surveyed the prisoners. "It's done," Sagan said, his voice heavy. "The warheads are secure, but the damage—" He gestured to the devastation around them. Buildings lay in ruins, and the bodies of Romulans and androids alike littered the streets. Kieran laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You see now the threat these machines pose? This is what your trust has brought us?" Sagan's hand clenched into a fist, but he held himself back. Instead, he leaned in close to Kieran, his voice barely above a whisper. "No, old friend, this is what fear has brought us. Fear of change, fear of the other." Sagan's eyes met David's, a silent understanding passing between them. "And now, we must find a way forward, or everything we've built will crumble." As Imperial forces moved in to secure Kieran, David and Sagan stood side by side, watching the chaos unfold around them. The battle was won, but the war for the future of their peoples was nowhere near the end. The dust settled on the ravaged capital, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. David stood amid the rubble, his shoulders slumped as he surveyed the destruction. Broken androids littered the streets, their once pristine forms now twisted and charred. Sagan approached, his footsteps crunching on shattered glass. "David, we need to talk." They found a quiet corner in a makeshift command center. Holograms flickered, displaying real-time damage reports from across the city. David sank into a chair, exhaustion etched on his face. "What's on your mind, old friend?" he asked. Sagan's eyes were heavy with the weight of recent events. "This cannot continue. The wounds run too deep." "What are you saying?" David leaned forward, a crease forming between his brows. Sagan took a deep breath. "We must separate. Romulus needs to forge its own path in synthetic development." David shot to his feet. "Are you insane? After everything we've accomplished?" "It's precisely because of what we've accomplished that we must do this," Sagan countered. "My people's fears. They're primal, David. You saw what Karen tapped into. We can't simply wish it away." David paced the room, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "So we just throw in the towel, let all our work go to waste?" Sagan stepped closer, placing a hand on David's shoulder. "Not waste, a necessary pause. We need time to address the rot within our own society." Hours of heated debate followed. David argued passionately for continuing their partnership, while Sagan calmly laid out the dangers of forcing the issue. In the end, David's shoulders sagged in resignation. "I don't like it," he muttered, "but I understand." The following days were a flurry of activity. David watched as Romulan technicians systematically deactivated and quarantined every co-developed android on the planet. Each powered-down unit felt like a personal failure. In a cavernous hangar, the last of the joint venture synthetics stood in neat rows. David and Sagan walked between them, their footsteps echoing in the silence. "It feels wrong," David said softly, "like we're abandoning them." Sagan nodded solemnly. "They are the children of our shared vision, but for now, they must sleep." A Romulan official approached, datapad in hand. "The decommissioning is complete, Minister Sagan. We await your final authorization." Sagan's finger hovered over the pad for a long moment before he pressed it firmly. The hangar lights dimmed, and security fields shimmered into existence around the dormant androids. Outside, David watched as Romulan ships loaded with research data and prototype components lifted off, heading for newly fortified facilities deep within Romulan space. The ache in his chest grew with each departure. "You realize what this could lead to?" David asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sagan nodded grimly. "An arms race. It's a risk we must take. Better that than another Karen." As the last transport prepared for departure, Sagan turned to face his human counterpart. "This isn't goodbye, David. It's until we meet again." David struggled to find the right words. "How can you be sure we will?" Sagan's eyes gleamed with a mix of sadness and hope. "Because the path we started on was the right one. My people just need time to find it for themselves." The Romulan extended his hand, and David clasped it firmly. No further words were needed as Sagan boarded the shuttle. David stepped back, shielding his eyes as the craft's engines flared to life. As the shuttle rose into the crimson Romulan sky, David felt a complex swirl of emotions. Sagan's departure marked the end of an era, yet carried with it the seeds of a possible future reunion. He watched until the craft was nothing more than a pinprick of light, vanishing into the vastness of space.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.